Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. So engagers, welcome once again to Professor Game. We have another repeat guest this week, a very special one, which is Clark. And Clark, before we get started, as before, we want to make sure that today as well, are you prepared to engage?
I am so prepared to engage.
Let's do this because we brought Clark Aldrich back. You can listen to the first episode 94. If you go to professorgame.com, type in the search bar Clark or Aldrich, and you will definitely find his episode there. There we talk about, the initial fail that Clark once had, a very nice and interesting success as well, part of his process, best practices, all sorts of stuff, even his favorite games as well. And if you want that jazz, actually you could do a back-to-back episode 94 with this episode as well. It could be a very interesting one. But we have to get on with the episode today, and the topic that we have today is precisely one of his specialties, and those are the short sims. And we were having a pre-chat today, Clark, and you were mentioning something about the future, of education and learning with short sims. Can you give us a quick jazz into that, and we'll get directly into the content?
I sure can. So most of us, or a lot of us, have produced e-learning content at various times for audiences, both large and small. And the traditional e-learning today is very much like a PowerPoint presentation or perhaps a video of someone talking. That's sort of the generic default e-learning content. And this e-learning content has evolved from classrooms and from books to some degree. What I'm proposing in the book Short Sims is a new type of content, a much more interactive content, not completely game-like, but something that has a bunch of interesting decisions to that consist of the course. And so if you're researching this content, for example, you're not just asking the expert what's the right way of doing something, but you're asking the expert what are common mistakes made. And you build those into the experience. And so you're typically as a first-person perspective, you're engaging in this and you're making a lot of decisions. You might make 10 or 15 or 20 decisions in the course of 7 or 8 minutes. And the decisions are interesting. And hopefully if you get them wrong, then they're kind of fun because you learn from them that way. So that simple model, again, what I'm calling the short sim model, typically will actually inverse the entire learning process in a way that I think has a lot more implications even than we first think.
Absolutely. That sounds very interesting. And as well, if you think about it, I do think it's a very interesting way. In fact, in a way, what we've been doing at IE Business School Publishing or IE University Publishing as well is creating materials that are, as a baseline, they are interactive in the sense that you make decisions, not necessarily always with decision trees, but in which you're doing stuff yourself and you're figuring out yourself. It can have a bit more as well on the pushing content every now and then, depending on what that looks like. But it is something that we have been working on as well. And I think we've had very powerful results in that sense. Some of them have gone, deeper into a, sort of more profound simulation in which you can spend, a full class of 80 minutes interacting between the students in the class and so on. That could be one route. Another route has been gamified learning, fully gamified learning materials. There are many routes, but I do think that there is a baseline, as you were mentioning, of what you call short sims, and that can be something very interesting. And even for those who say, well, but that's maybe too basic, which I'm not sure if I would agree with that. But even if you say, well, that's not basic, well, that's almost a good thing. It's a base where you can build upon that if you want to build sort of further interaction, further engagement, and so on. So I do think it is an interesting model to build upon. What are your thoughts like going deeper into this?
Sure. I'd love to make a case for simple because I think you are right. Yeah. You are exactly right. And anyone who criticizes the model as being too basic is right. So I'll stipulate all of that. But there's two reasons why this perhaps is interesting. And first of all is a tremendous amount of content can be presented as a series of interesting decisions. If you have 5 or 7 or 10 interesting decisions one after another, and some evolution of the process depending on the decisions you make, but actually it's a very profound learning experience. It can, if you hit interesting decisions, then forces you to reflect upon the content in a very specific way. So I think the simplicity of this structure, and very much so the simplicity of the media, does not necessarily mean for a not profound experience or not appropriate experience. Then, on the other hand, there is an opportunity. There's a place in the world for not super deep content. And so, if one interesting thing, is certainly in the corporate world, is most corporations don't want training that is too deep and too time consuming and too profound, for the very obvious reason that most people won't do it. So if you give a salesperson a very profound bit of training, they'll probably get lost or get frustrated or walk away from it. So there is a need for sort of bite-sized content, certainly in the corporate space and in the military space for a lot of things, and for a lot of things in the academic, perhaps more so than we want to think. Even in the academic world, there is a need for sort of simpler things. The other side of the equation, though, which is what makes it, I think, even more profoundly interesting, is my short sims approach has a philosophy of saying, what can one good designer, create in 1 week? And that's a really important way of thinking about it, because so your 80-minute long simulation, which may be great, is probably going to take 2 or 3 years ultimately to create and refine. It's going to be a very large investment, more so than most people have most of the time. So what if you work backwards from there and say, what can one person, one great designer, create in 1 week using, in a lot of cases, clip art or standard media, but good. I mean, one can be very creative, one can be very clever, one can be very devious. I think deviousness is a very important trait in people, and sucking people down bad paths and allowing people to express their worst motivations or their worst attributes is a lot of fun. So, seducing people into making huge, profound mistakes is hugely fun. So if you have that notion of what can one designer create in 1 week, and that means anyone who is interested in a short sim can create their short sim in about 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks, whatever the time period is for the first one. And that's a really important thing, because in the olden days of your profound game-like gamifications experiences or your hour-long sims, it's very hard to sort of wrap your arms around it, and most people will try it and get frustrated. I want people to be able to follow a rigorous process, create very interesting, good content, but also, be done with it. And so the professor can create this content in his or her basement over the course of a few different weekends. This is not a commitment to a skill, and that's really important for a bunch of reasons, including our collective ability to create enough content that the world needs. The world needs a tremendous amount of interactive content, and if we set our sights too high, then we don't get anything done, or we get a few big things done. So the point is to have sort of a culture of continuous creation.
Absolutely. And again, I'm going to backtrack a little bit of some of the things that you said. Definitely. I mean, one of the things that you said about the amount of time that a 90-minute, 80-minute, even 3-hour simulation might take. And I'm going to go on two directions here. One is some of the simulations that we've created. We've spent years creating them. And it's not just one person sitting there. The way that we create is that we have somebody that we call the project manager, who's like at the center. It's sort of a mix between a project manager and an instructional designer. And that person sits, of course, with what, in corporates you would call the subject matter expert, which is a professor who is the expert in the topic, who maybe does research or is a consultant and dedicates his life to this. And that would be like the owner, the subject matter expert. And then you have as well, the developers. So you have audio visuals, and you have like all sorts of things that go around this user experience and so on. So it is an investment. I mean, and IE has been doing this for 20 years, and discounting all that experience or dismissing it very quickly is very easy, and say, well, what we do is we have a great school, we have a great team, and we can just pull it off at the first time. And I would argue that that's not exactly the case, but even if you do, it is a huge effort. Definitely. I completely agree. And even there's other companies that I've seen and great things that they've done, and they've had like massive grants for the government and spend like literally millions of euros or dollars, just creating this one super complex, fantastic, beautiful game that works very well. But, not everybody has the capacity, financially, time-wise, to dedicate to these kinds of things. So I do think there is a lot of power there. And like getting back to my other argument, I don't know if you wanted to say something else, Clark.
Well, I want to say, again, the short sim approach, does not compete with the big sims. The big sims are fabulous, and they should be done. The short sim approach competes with sort of the material you have to read around the big sim, or in some cases instead of the big sim. So instead of reading a case study, you'll play a sim. Instead of studying a textbook, you'll play a few sims. And so it's that notion. That's what we're going to replace. I will say, though, in some cases, some of the big learning objectives that we've only been able to do in the big sims, we actually can do in the short sims as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the other thing that I was getting at. I mean, there's a lot of, and I mean, I'm teaching as well, and some of the things that we use, because I mean, on one hand, there might not be too many great alternatives, but these are even like very good materials. They're not very interactive, and if one of your objectives is to make this very interactive, and that could be a very, very valuable objective as well, to engage your students, to get people excited about these things. And again, don't discount just, the excitedness is not an objective in itself. Well, maybe, because people learn better.
Engagement is important.
Yes, and you learn better that way. When you're engaged, when you're, stuck to this material and you can't get your mind off it and of what you're learning, you're definitely going to be more open to the experience. And if you're open to the experience and the experience is good and it's teaching you something, well, then you're learning.
I've created the process whereby someone like you can say, my students are getting stuck in a few of these issues, or they're not enjoying learning about a few of these issues. I'm going to go and I'm going to spend a bit of time and I'm going to bang out a few sims, and I'm going to give them to the kids to the students for homework or whatever, and they're going to do them and they're going to enjoy them and gain it's a different way of presenting content. Exactly. And then I'm going to go and get a feedback from that, and they're going to say, geez, I really like them, but I still have a few questions. And then you can go and over the next weekend or Thursday afternoon or whatever, you can make a few small changes and make it a little better, test it again. And so you have a very high iterative approach. Where anyone, and part of the point is creating a framework, creating a process, a pedagogy even, where anyone no longer has any excuse not to make interactive content. I can make interactive content. I can start it tomorrow and I'll be done, 2 weeks from tomorrow if I'm not doing it full time, and it'll be good, and I can give it to people and they can play it. I don't need a media specialist. I don't need a sound specialist. And where I'm wrong and where I can do a better job, I can then tweak it or give it to other people to have them tweak. And I think that's the value of being able to present something fundamentally different. The other advantage to it, the short sim process, is again, you start thinking about student actions, and so first of all, you're thinking about actions. It's a really good thing. If we're writing traditional text, for example, or traditional paragraphs, we're thinking about recipes, or we're thinking about timelines, or A to B to C to D. And we're thinking about it in a very linear way. But if we're thinking about content through the framework of a short sim, now we're saying, okay, I'm going to be doing project management. What are some interesting decisions I have to make? I'm going to be learning about doing a merger. Okay, I'm going to be doing a short sim on one kind of merger. Okay, well, what are decisions I have to make? Where can I go wrong? The whole process of creating a short sim makes you think about the content a lot more deeply, and also about the student experience a lot more profoundly, because that's your reference.
Absolutely. But you also led into something when you started the second answer, which I think is super important, and it's the iteration process. And again, even if you're sort of dismissing this in your mind in the sense that this is just maybe too basic, you're looking for something bigger. If you're looking for something bigger, I have to make the argument for starting small and simple. That is something very, very difficult to argue with, especially because if you go, sort of down to your basement, and nothing wrong with going down to your basement, right, Clark?
I'm there now, so no, hopefully not.
That was just a quick pun. But what I mean is going down to your basement, spending 2-3 years creating something and coming out, and there's a chance it doesn't work. There's a chance that what you were expecting, some of the assumptions you made were not correct. So why not, instead of spending those 2 to 3 years all by yourself without, sort of much interaction, spending, as Clark was saying, 1 week, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, getting something out, testing it, see how it's roughly working, and then maybe improving upon that and making it bigger, or combining a set of, a set of small sims or short sims that you already have, putting them together and making a grand experience, if that's what you're looking for.
The other part that's very interesting is, again, we're thinking of lone wolves. We're thinking of people kind of, creating a sim or getting a large grant and pulling together a stellar team, which again is not easy to do and it'll be harder to do. But I think the other thing is we have to get into a culture where we can look at other people's sims, just like we look at other people's case studies, and make improvements on them and change them and modify them
and use them as well.
Most importantly, to use them. And I think we're getting closer to a world where if increasingly the standard for online content becomes interactive and simulation based, but in a very in a simple way and not in a super complex way. If we're moving towards that world, we can have a tremendous amount of volume. We can get there, and it's easy for I can't if you say I have a great business simulation and I like to share it with you. My first thought is, oh, geez, will it even run on my platform? Can I have it? Do I even know how to do it? Oh, is it on the Xbox, or is it on is it on iOS, or is it on a PC, or is it, whatever? All of these kinds of issues. Right now, in terms of the short sim approach, all those go away. It's browser based, and it's optimized around a browser experience. So it's not reliant on a lot of sort of complicated technology that can age out very quickly. So I can share it. The other thing too is increasingly we can start editing other people's stuff. If you give me a game and say, here it is, and I have a couple of issues with it, there's not really much I can do. I'm kind of stuck. But if you give me a short sim that you made on some kind of mathematical process, say around evaluating the value of a corporation you're going to acquire, whatever, I can go into it and I can look and see how you designed it very quickly, especially if I know what I'm doing. I can figure out some of the decisions that you make, and I can modify that, again, depending on the licensing agreement or perhaps the open source, hopefully, environment that we're in. I can take your sim and I can modify it. I can change it. I can evolve it. I can make a forked version of it. And I think that is, again, we do that all the time with case studies. We do it all the time with textbooks. We do it all the time with history. We can work off of what other people have created. And I think we have to get that place to that place in interactive content. And again, short sims is right now the single best way of doing that.
There you go. And you also made an argument there about using other people's, and where we start as well, of using other people's things that are already created, which I think is absolutely fabulous. I don't think that every single time you have to look at creating something from scratch. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it doesn't exist, and maybe the best route is to create it yourself. But sometimes even experimenting with what other people have done so that you understand the methodology better, and so that you focus your energies and your time in what is actually going to be more meaningful, what is going to be more in your area of expertise, what are you more comfortable with. Maybe you don't have to create a full syllabus, so to speak in terms of higher education. Maybe you don't have to create that whole syllabus yourself. Maybe there are bits and pieces that you can take from other people's short sims, case studies that can be interactive as well, some simulations, and create your own one, maybe even just one short sim that is exactly what you're missing from your content, and see how it works. And even take it from there. I mean, probably,
Absolutely.
You're going to create other ones as well.
So there's a bunch of things you brought up there, which are all kind of exciting. One of them is necessarily playing other people's short sims and saying, hey, that was really good. I can do better. And that's great. I want people to read the book Short Sims or see some examples that I put up there. And I don't want their dominant thought to be, wow, Clark is so smart. That's really impressive. I want them to go, oh, that's fine. I can do better. I understand where he's going, and I'm gonna bang out my own, and I think mine's gonna be better. And that's what I want. That's what I want people to do by reading the book or by seeing the stuff that's out there. I want them to beat me, to do a better sim than any of mine. So part of it is looking how other people solve problems, how other people present information graphically, how other people present the narrative structures, and how well do you have a narrative structure? How deep of a narrative do you have? How do you use graphics in a clever way? How do you use words in a clever way? All this stuff, we're just on the ground floor. We're just creating a new language around interactivity. Then we have some of the old stuff from books and PowerPoints, and we have some of the old stuff from computer games. But we are creating something that's fundamentally new here in terms of this kind of lightweight but highly effective interactive content. So we can be inspired from other people. In some cases, we can take other people's sims, download them or whatever, and edit them and make small changes, or look at the design and say, that's a really clever design. I'm going to use this design in a whole different topic. Okay, that design was on horticulture. I'm going to do an entirely different design on gene splicing or whatever, by taking the same content. And then your other point, which I think is really important to know, is saying, we put together courses, whether we're at a corporation or government or military or, as you say, academic, we put together collections of content. And one thing that we get to think about is what percentage of it is going to be videos, and what percentage of it is going to be case studies, and traditional linear case studies, and what percentage of it is going to be textbooks. I think we're getting to a point now where we can start introducing short sims into that alchemy, into that chemistry of saying, what percentage of short sims do we have? What I've been able to do, and again, I've been working on this methodology now for many years. So I've had some clients of mine who have been coming back to me year after year after year, and what I'm seeing in my clients is when corporations have started with 10 or 15% of the content in a given course being short sims and the rest being traditional online learning, every single year they've moved that number up, 15, 20, 25. Now I'm up to 40% in a couple of clients. The percentage of the time spent, in short sims versus other content is up to 40% in some of these clients, and I think they're still going to go higher than that. So I think we're just, we're even trying to figure out what is the right percentage of content, but it's high, and it might be very high.
That is absolutely amazing, Clark. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Clark, we've been sort of beating around the bushes. We've been talking about this process of short sims. What do you mean? I know it will be fantastically explained in the book, and you'll give us details on where to find the book, definitely. But can you give us an idea of what that looks like? Spend, 5 minutes or so giving us a general, thought process around what we can do with this.
Sure. So I think the very first step, obviously, is to pick out a topic, and that there are things that make good content and things that make bad content. But by and large, whenever anyone is doing anything, it tends to be very good for a short sim. So if someone is solving a kind of a problem, or if someone is considering acquiring a company, or if someone is, filling out a form, or someone's doing long division, or someone is recalibrating the whatever. So the first thing you want to do is pick out a good topic for a short sim. Once you do that, again, you can identify the audience. The really important sort of big step is the interview process with the subject matter experts, and we talked about that earlier on. But for one 10-minute short sim, which is a good amount for a short sim, you can usually do the interview for a subject matter expert in about 1 hour. And the primary question for that expert is, again, what's the right way of doing this, and what are common mistakes? So dig into this issue of why do people make that mistake? And that turned out to be the interesting thing. And by the way, if you are doing outside research as well, which you should always do, don't look, go into chat rooms and look at where everyone complains about something or where everyone is confused. So, learn from all the mistakes. So doing a 1 hour interview with a subject matter expert, focusing on what are common mistakes, why do they make mistakes, getting all those down. From those notes, you can start creating a bunch of basically note cards. I do it virtually. Here are a series of common problems. Here's a series of interesting solutions. Here are some interesting side notes. And then from those pile of notes you can start thinking about your short sim. The real big question for the short sim design at this process is, what's the setting going to be? Is this going to be a theoretical setting? Is this going to be a microcosm? Here's a little example of it being done. Here's how it's normally done. So the next challenge there is coming up with a setting for your short sim. Once you have, again, all these notes and you have the setting, then you start blocking out the basic interactions. And I tend to do that in terms of levels. It might be 5 or 6 or 7 levels. Each level, deals with some part of the process and giving people a lot of little decisions along the way. And then from that point, you start thinking of visuals and graphics. What are the minimal graphics I'm going to need to put this together? And it could, I love clip art. I have some great short sims. I think they're great. They don't use any art at all other than someone talking, and it's an ongoing organic dialogue. Other times I have a tremendous amount of clip art and a tremendous amount of in some cases, custom art to sort of, to visually present something. And along that process of creating the setting and the metaphor and the interface, and the graphics, you start thinking about, do I need to have is this going to be a mini map? Is this going to be some kind of abstract graphic? Is this going to be something, much more concrete? Whatever. So then at this point, you start banging it together. You start creating your short sim. You start, all these little note cards you have, you start weaving them together and creating an interactive narrative. And again, if this is 1 week, you're now about 15 hours into it. And then once you do that, then you, refine it. And, I find, what one day I spend kind of blocking out all the content, getting it roughly right, and then I get a headache and go to bed, and I wake up the next morning, and then you can start really just smoothing out, like you're sanding some piece of wood, you're just smoothing out everything and making it more and more fluid. The smoothing out process is, really, really important, because one of the other problems with sort of the big expensive games is that you can't do the fine tuning as well, because you have someone who created a quote and it's an actor and you can't get that actor back, or you're already committed to hard coding a lot of the stuff. With a short sim, it's a very fluid process. So you're always going through it, and you're always making tiny little changes and refining the words. To this point, you have a pretty good sim. It's about 10 minutes long or whatever, and it's good. And this point, the next big stage is getting feedback from everyone. You get it to your sponsors, you get it to custom audiences, and they go through it. And again, it's really important because the short sim process is very fluid. It's very easy to make changes. You're actually happy to get feedback from people, unlike a computer game experience where the last thing you want is feedback because it's so hard to change. If someone says, I don't really like this level, or why didn't we do something different, or I don't like the graphics, I don't like the coach character, I don't like the whatever, then you can go and you can make all these changes, and you can make them in the course of a day or two or three, rather than going back for 6 months and rehiring your artist or someone. So
if not, you can ask the designers of the visual looks of Sonic the Hedgehog for the movie.
Exactly. So the ease of change is really important at this part of the process, and even adding entire new levels, you're not going to break the bank. And then then it's done, and I think, and then you can push it out to people, and sometimes I deploy them through iframes, or sometimes I do them through Swarm or whatever. But it's it's a very lightweight, fast process that creates very satisfying content. And again, I love how fast it is to create the content, because that makes it a viable business. But it also makes it something that where we can ramp up as quickly as possible to create the amount of content that we need.
That is fantastic. I'm going to try to run down the steps to see if I got them right, and you will be correcting me along the way. Is that good?
Sure.
So, of course, you definitely have to start off by what do you want to simulate? What do you want to experience? What do you want your learners to be there doing? And I think a key word there is what do you want them to be able to do? Is that correct?
Yes, and the role that they have, what do you want them to be able to do rather than what you want them to know?
Exactly. I think the active role is something that is fundamental to this methodology, and to something that we have been advocating a lot as well. So that's the first thing. What do you want people to be able to do? It's just like with the process we've been discussing many times. What is your objective? What do you want the people to be able to do, to accomplish? So that's definitely the first thing. That's where you get started. A next step would be sitting down with the subject matter expert, if it's not you. It could also be the case as well. If you're a teacher, if you're a trainer, and you're the subject matter expert, that could be sitting down by yourself, I guess, and sort of writing down, hashing out all these questions that Clark was mentioning, like what is the typical thing that happens, and what's the right way to do it, but also, and it's very, very key, what are the typical mistakes? What are the typical things that people get wrong? What are the complaints people have about this process, or when they're learning, what are the typical things they never get to understand? Because that's exactly what you want to, sort of place and sprinkle around the simulation for people to maybe even get it wrong several times, so that they learn that that's not the right path.
And I think the important thing there is to encourage, to say up front, hey, this is not a test. And most people think of interactivity as assessment, which is terrible. And so we can say, it's okay to make mistakes. And by the way, in some cases, you may want to make a mistake. You may, once you get the right answer, you may go back and make wrong answers, because you want to make the mistakes fun and interesting and illuminating, so that people are rewarded by making mistakes, just like a computer game. Computer games are wonderful because they teach us that mistakes are fun and interesting, and you get to see things from a different perspective. So creating a culture. And again, we'll get to this later, but the tone of the sim is not didactic. It's not mean. It's not, strict. It's playful. It's encouraging. We maybe use a bit of slang. We may be whatever. And we're going to encourage people to be a little snarky. We're going to encourage them to make mistakes. And then in some cases, we're going to try to seduce them into making mistakes. Sorry, go on. So yes, we've interviewed the subject matter expert now.
And taking a look at what are these mistakes that you want to do. And the next step, I guess, which is the usual thing that we have to start doing. We have to start creating. Is that right?
Yeah, and the breaking down the interview is really important. So I tend to record. Okay. I tend to record experts. I'll get the entire thing on audio with their permission, of course. And then I'll listen to that recording, and it'll take me about 3 hours to listen to a 1 hour recording. And I go through it very, very carefully, and I grab everything I can. I write little notes. Again, I do it virtually, typically in the sim environment, because I'm lazy. And get all the little, all the mistakes, all the interesting points in the process, all the right way of doing things, the wrong ways of doing things. In some cases, the wording, I love the wording the experts use, because they're the experts. I'm not. So the experts will say things in a certain way, and as much as possible, I want to transcribe those and capture those in the sim itself, so that the coach or the characters with which the player is interacting has the voice of the expert, because again, they're the smart ones. I'm not.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's exactly what you will use to start creating them and getting that fundamental feedback that you need. Fundamental, and you can keep on collecting feedback the first time, the second time, the third time that you use it, and continue improving, even if just slightly, or if you're taking somebody else's sim. There's always room for improvement. There's many things that you can do, and see whether it's worth investing a little bit more of effort and doing it a little bit better.
There's two steps I want to play with a little more, because they're really just that I talked about, but I just want to make sure. So a really big one is creating the sim setting. So once you have all of these mistakes,
yes,
you really got to think, okay, what's the experience going to be? What's the perspective going to be? Is it going to be, hey, here are 5 examples, or is it going to be Thursday morning and you wake up and you're hungry and your birthday was yesterday and you're still cutting up the cake, or
setting up the theme, absolutely.
You want to create the setting, and is it you're a small business and you want to grow, or is it you've just been handed a lawsuit and you have to prepare for it, or but you want to create the setting, and you want to think about that really hard, because it's incredibly important. People are going to spend their time in that. You want some kind of narrative, if at all possible, at beginning and middle and end, to take people through. And again, in some cases, it might be a microcosm. It might be, okay, we're going to teach them how to do water management, but we're going to give them a sink and a straw and let them play with the sink and the straw. And then at the end say, hey, by the way, the water tables work the same way, or whatever. So, we want to, create that sim setting, which is really, really important. That's going to deal with the graphics. That's going to deal with the interface. And then again, once you have that setting, start saying, okay, I have this setting and I have all these notes. How can I organize these notes chronologically along the beginning, middle, and end of my setting? Maybe levels, level 1, level 2, level 3, getting a little harder each time. We're dealing with different things each time. And then start going from those levels to, and this pile of notes, to kind of creating a schematic. What I like to do is create kind of a no decisions, but just clicking from one decision point to the next, and just getting a feeling for the flow of it. Is this, am I spending too long in this one section? Am I spending not enough time on the other section? So being able to go through a no decision version of a sim, almost like you're going through a storyboard, and then start adding the decisions or fleshing them out. And then again, start adding, and as you're thinking about all this stuff, you start thinking about the nature of the visuals. Are these visuals going to be computer gamey? Are they going to be isomorphic? Are they going to be photorealistic? Are they going to be not at all and just all text based, like old Zork games? How am I going to present this information? I've spent a lot of time writing speeches early on in my life, and so I'm very comfortable doing builds. And you can use a good slide build the same way you can use a good graphic build, which is this sensation of building, the sensation of movement, especially if there are decisions around builds, and then the players can actually take a build in different directions depending on what they want. So being very clever and very judicious about graphics at this point, and then again getting to the point that you are at, where once these things start coming together, and this is just a real magic. And I was just feeling this yesterday, when it goes from this pile of notes to an experience, you actually go through and go, oh wow, this is kind of cool. This is very satisfying, and there's this wonderful feeling of when it all comes together. Because at some point you're going to get nervous and scared and a bunch of, and you're not really sure what you're doing, but then suddenly it just like pops together, and suddenly you're no longer working upwards from a pile of notes, but you're working backwards from having this great sim being done, and it's like a magical feeling. I think it's addictive, and I think people, once they do the first one, want to get that feeling again of saying. And I guess it's probably very similar to doing a good computer program, where you go from OMG, I've got to create this program, to suddenly when it works, it's just it is magic. And it's not, and in building, when you get to the short sim and suddenly it all flows and you're playing it and it just goes by smoothly and it feels effortless and you smooth out all the lines and it's just like, wow, that was a really fun way of learning about something.
And it's working.
And amazing, it's working. And the nice thing about a short sim, unlike something computational, is because it's all hard coded, you don't have the miserableness of debugging. You don't have the miserableness of, I can't believe it crashed. Really, it crashed. Where did it crash? It's a very, very important part of the process of the short sim philosophy, is because it's all state-based. It's 100% transparent. You don't have any mysterious things happen, and therefore you can do it in a week, because again, in a typical sim, you're going to spend half the time just running through every permutation and debugging, and you don't have that in this process. So when it's done, it's done.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I love this level of getting into all those details about the building process in itself, because it's not just about the preparation. We were talking about the building and then the feedback. I love this sort of framework that you have of going into each of these steps that you go through to build that. And you were talking a little bit about technology. I don't know if you have a 1 minute sort of speech in which you can at least give us an advance of what does it look like when you were going to create it, because you were mentioning of putting it into an iframe and that it's hard coded. So there's a few technical terms. I just don't want to leave people, just like, oh my God, now it's complicated. It's zeros and ones. What do I do?
No, it's never complicated. So there's a couple of different vendors that I've been using a lot of, and one of them is BranchTrack. And if you go to www.branchtrack, branchtrack.com, really important, they'll give you your first one for free. So if you want to just start learning, you want to start batting this stuff around and practicing, go to BranchTrack, set up an account, get your first one for free, and start building them. And it's basically, you're moving around boxes, you're connecting them with lines. So it's not harder than using a typical Android or iPhone device or iOS device. And you start creating the connections. I would start off the process by creating a very linear sim just to get the hang of it. And it's amazing how creative you can actually be with linear sim. Most of them start off with the default framework of it's a conversation with someone, and so I always think of the person I'm having a conversation with mostly as my coach, not as the bad guy or someone I'm competing with. So, give yourself a coach role. But then you can start swapping out the backgrounds with graphics. You can start, being a lot more creative with the interface in terms of the kinds of conversations. At this point, you probably want to look at a few examples of short sims. And so you can go to my site, www.shortsims.com/play, Play, and that'll take you to a bunch of sims that I've done. You can also go to just the head of the site, the home of the site, and there's a bunch of little videos as well, because if you're too lazy to actually play it yourself, I have a few, I'm serious. Then I have a few videos of plays of them. So you can just get the general flavor of them. And I think there's going to be two feelings you're going to have almost one after another. The first one is, oh, these are no big deal. And the second one is, oh, these might actually be a very big deal. They're no big deal in terms of production value. There's no big deal in terms of graphics. They're not going to, amaze you. But as you start seeing them and as you start playing them, you go, oh, wow, this actually does fundamentally change the process of learning. And it changes the process of learning in a way that's a lot more fun to learn. As a student, it's a lot more fun. I'm also going to argue it's a lot more fun as a designer to create these things than creating the horrible, PowerPoint slide stuff. But also it gets interesting because it starts, we're getting into a world of AI. We're getting into a world where there's going to be a lot of analysis of these courses. And frankly, the short sims produce a really good transcript that are going to actually feed all the AI machines a lot better than traditional content, and even better than, I'm going to argue, complex computer games that can overwhelm AI. So as you're doing this stuff, you start realizing what a fundamental change it is. And as you get over your not being very impressed feeling, which is fair enough, then you start becoming very impressed in terms of, oh, wait a minute, I could use these to do all these things that I couldn't do before. So it's the whole journey is an incredibly fun one.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you very much for all these details, all this inspiration.
Far too many details. I apologize. I'm in the weeds. I'm geeky.
No. Absolutely. I mean, this is exactly what we're looking for. People are very interested in this, and I think it's a very interesting framework to get started on, or to continue your journey if you already started. So, Clark, we're getting to the end of the interview. Of course, we want to make sure we are able to find your book. Will you give us that link today, or is it going to be available when we put it in the show notes?
It'll be available when this podcast is available, and you can go to Amazon or whatever and type in Short Sims, and it'll be there. Short Sims by Clark Aldrich. You can always go to my website, www.shortsims.com, and the information will be there as well.
Fantastic. We will definitely put that available if you go to professorgame.com. If you type again Clark, you'll find the 2 episodes. This will be the second one that we recorded, and there you'll be able to find all of these links that we've been talking about. You'll be able to get the book. You'll be able to go to Short Sims, the webpage that Clark has, the play page. All of these things, will have them definitely on the show notes. So again, Clark, thank you very much for this very fun conversation, at least on my end. Hopefully the engagers and yourself as well had a lot of fun, and we'll be able to profit in the good sense from this conversation. And however, for now, and at least for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this, double second interview with Clark Aldrich. And I'd like to know if you have any questions that you would like to ask future guests. If you do, all you have to do is go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, it will come up in a future episode, and there you will get your answer. And before you go on to your next mission, are you curious about the next episode? Would you like to know what this special episode is all about? Then all you have to do is subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.